Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. We're going to have Jan Morgan of janmorgan.com on at the bottom of the hour to talk about this business with these two Muslim terrorists who committed the Boston Muslim massacre a week ago today. Got some more information to bring you on all of this. Now, let's grab clip number 2, Rob. Let's have that ready to go, because we know now that these two brothers were Muslims. We know that the older brother in particular was a hardcore radical Muslim. We know that he had a YouTube channel in which he had had 4 subscriptions, one channel devoted to the theme that Allah is the one God, and a second channel devoted to the theme of terrorists. That was the heading of the channel, terrorists. So we know he got thrown out of a mosque just 3 months ago because he challenged the imam who was using Martin Luther King Jr. as an example. And he said, you can't do that. Muhammad is our only example. So he interrupted the sermon. Apparently they asked him to leave. He's gone back since and behaved himself. But it's just a peek into his mindset. So we know these guys were Muslim. We know their motivation was to advance the cause of Islam, to advance the cause of Allah, to advance the kingdom of Allah and the kingdom of the messenger of Allah. And we know that they were doing it in obedience to the Holy Quran, the holy book of Islam, which says in Surah 9:5, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Ambush them, besiege them, lie in wait for them. So we know that this was their motivation. There's no question about this. And we'll talk about kind of the meme that the media is going to work with here. But I want to go back to Friday night. Here's President Obama. And you'll notice that he's he's the first salvo in this meme that we're going to hear from secular fundamentalists. And here's going to be the meme. These guys were lone wolves. You can't draw any conclusions about Islam. You can't draw any conclusions about the people of Islam around the world from this incident. This is a one-off. These guys were off in the fringe. They were acting on their own. They're not connected to anybody. Even the mayor said they were acting alone, and now we find out that the FBI is telling us that they believe that they are connected to a terrorist cell, a sleeper cell, that has at least 12 people in it. They've already arrested 2 people that they suspect of being connected, and they say, look, this thing was way too sophisticated for these 2 guys to pull off without help. Somebody trained them. We know that the older brother had gone to Russia, to Dagestan, which is a hotbed of Islamic extremism. We know that the police there contacted our FBI. This is 6 months ago. 6 months ago. And they said, look, this guy showed up here. He's met at least 6 times with a radical imam, a radical jihadist imam, at least 6 times. Now we can't find the guy, and we can't find this guy that came here from, we don't know where he is. But he met 6 times with a radical jihadist imam. And then he flies back to the United States, and the FBI says, we had no idea. We had this guy under surveillance. So, I mean, you talk about the lapse here in the responsibility of the FBI. They were even told by the Russian police after he came back from Dagestan, this guy's a bad actor. He's a bad apple. You got to watch this guy. He comes sailing back into the country, and next thing we know, 3 people are dead, 25 people have their legs blown off, and 176 people are in the hospital. But here is President Obama Friday night. Here's what he had to say.
This age of instant reporting, tweets and blogs, there's a temptation to latch onto any bit of information, sometimes to jump to conclusions. But when a tragedy like this happens, with public safety at risk and the stakes so high, it's important that we do this right. That's why we have investigations. That's why we relentlessly gather the facts. That's why we have courts. And that's why we take care not to rush to judgment. Not about the motivations of these individuals, certainly not about entire groups of people.
So that's President Obama saying, look, we cannot rush to judgment. I predicted this. I sent a tweet out before he spoke, and I said, this is exactly what he's going to say. He's going to say we can't rush to judgment. We don't have all the facts. We've got to wait for the investigation. We've got to wait for the court trials to take place. that he was just going to try to ignore the plain obvious fact that this was a jihadist attack that was motivated and driven by Islamic ideology, driven, in fact, by the Holy Quran itself. These young men did what they did in the name of Allah. They did it out of obedience to their prophet, and they did it out of obedience to the commands in their holy book, the Quran. There's just no question about that. So we've done the investigation. We've got the facts. And so now, apparently, according to President Obama's rubric, it's okay for us now to begin drawing some conclusions because we've been exploring what these guys have been up to. But notice President Obama says you can't rush to judgment about the motivations of these individuals. Now, remember, and Jeff included this in the teaser at the top of the hour, the intro. Remember, this is the guy when the police arrested this black professor at Harvard. I mean, right away that night, President Obama's out there speculating about the racist motives of the Boston Police Department and how they acted stupidly. He rushed to judgment, no investigation, no facts. In fact, it turned out that almost everything he believed about that incident and said about that incident was flat 180 degrees wrong. So President Obama feels like apparently the privilege of rushing to judgment without investigation, without having all the facts, is reserved for him and for him alone. Now, let's go to clip 3. This is Tom Brokaw, and I want you to listen to what Tom Brokaw says, that things are actually more dangerous now than they were before, that by taking out bin Laden, we actually further outraged the Islamic community. So in other words, and we'll see in just a moment, we'll play another soundbite from Tom Brokaw, that basically this is our fault. When we took out bin Laden, that just made them mad. It just ticked them off, and now we're paying the price for that. Here's Tom Brokaw.
But there are a couple of things to remember here, David, I think, for all of us. With the death of Osama bin Laden, Islamic rage did not go away. In fact, in some ways, it's more dangerous. This is a perfect example. You can't get intel on the lone operators. So there's a lot that we still need to know about what motivated him, obviously. He's a Chechen, but their beef is with Russia, not with us. But he's also a Muslim. And the fact is that Islamic rage is still out there. We saw it in Times Square. We were very, very fortunate under those circumstances. So there has to be more vigilance, obviously.
So Tom Brokaw says, yeah, there's Islamic rage out there. So at least he has the honesty to admit that there is rage that is connected to Islam. I mean, that's a pretty significant admission. He's saying, look, there are people out there that are angry. They're outraged. There is rage out there that is connected to the Islamic religion. And it's gotten worse since bin Laden. Things are now more dangerous. There's more Islamic outrage. There's more Islamic rage targeted against us now than there was before we took out bin Laden. The implication is, look, we just made things worse by taking out bin Laden. Now, here is a second clip, clip 4 from Tom Brokaw, and you'll see here where he places the blame for what happened in Boston a week ago.
But I think that there's something else that goes beyond the event that we've all been riveted by in the last week. We have to work a lot harder as a motivation here. What prompts a young man to come to this country and still feel alienated from it, to go back to Russia and do whatever he did? And I don't think we've examined that enough. I mean, there was 24/7 coverage on television, a lot of newspaper print and so on. But we've got to look at the roots of all of this, because it exists across the whole subcontinent and the Islamic world around the world. And I think we also have to examine the use of drones that the United States is involved in. And there are a lot of civilians who are innocently killed in a drone attack in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq. And I can tell you, having spent a lot of time over there, young people will come up to me on the streets and say, we love America, but if you harm one hair on the head of my sister, I will fight you forever. And there is this enormous rage against what they see in that part of the world as a presumptionist of the United States.
So here's Tom Brokaw, and this is significant to me because it leads in. I have a column up at onenewsnow.com. You can go to onenewsnow.com or go down to the AFA blogs and read it. And the title of my piece is We Cannot Watch Them All. Now, this is, Tom Brokaw doesn't realize what he's saying here. Poor guy. He doesn't realize he just made my case here, because Tom Brokaw cannot stop talking about the fact that there's all this Islamic rage out there. They hate us. And they hate us because we took out Osama bin Laden. That just made things worse. That's like throwing gasoline on the fire. And the problem is our drones. We're taking out terrorists with drones, and that outrages Muslims all over the world against the United States, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And he says, look, young people come up to me on the streets warning me about what they'll do to us if my sister is harmed or killed by one of these drones. I will fight you forever. So what is Tom Brokaw admitting here? He doesn't even realize the significance of what he's saying. He's saying there is an enormous, he used the word enormous rage. And I don't know how many times he used the word rage in these two sound bites, but 3 or 4 times. And here he says there's an enormous rage against the presumptuousness of the United States. So he's saying, look, Muslims all over the world, they hate us. They despise us. There's enormous rage that's directed against us. They are going to fight us to the death because they believe we've harmed innocent civilians. So they are going to fight us forever. They're going to fight us to death. They're going to fight us to the end of time. So what's the logical conclusion? What's the logical conclusion that you come to based on what Tom Brokaw is saying? The logical conclusion that you come to is we have to suspend the practice of Muslim immigration. Because if we bring Muslims to our shores and we invite them into our country, Tom Brokaw, I'm not saying this. This is Tom Brokaw who is saying this. These people are enraged with us. They're outraged with us. There's this enormous rage that's directed against the United States. They're going to fight us forever. This is Tom Brokaw saying this, so I see the logical conclusion. Well, it's time to suspend Islamic immigration. Now, and I say in my column, I talked about this Friday, we can thank God, and I mean that sincerely, we can thank God every day that most Muslims in America do not want to kill us and slit our throats and blow us up. The problem is we don't know which Muslims they are. You know, over and over again, we heard the description of this younger brother. He was the one that put the bomb down in front of the 8-year-old boy. Nice, quiet, one of us, friendly. Now we find out he's as guilty as his brother.
My grandson is 13 today. He's been very responsible with his